Welcome to the Better Behavior Show with Dr. Nicole Beurkens, best-selling author, psychologist, nutritionist, and mom, where we'll be discussing ways to improve your child's attention, anxiety, mood, and behavior with simple strategies you can use right now. The following discussion is for educational purposes only and not intended to diagnose or treat any disorder. Please do not apply any of this information without first speaking with your doctor. Now, let's head to the show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and on today's episode, we're talking about executive function skills and how they impact learning, behavior, and just general life functioning for our kids. You've got a child who tends to forget things, can't stay organized, doesn't get things done on time, or maybe struggles to complete tasks independently. You're going to love the info and tips that we're going to share on this episode. My guest today is Sarah Ward, a specialist in helping children and teens develop executive function skills. Her resources, strategies, trainings are things that we use at our clinic here in Michigan on a daily basis. And so I'm really excited to have her here to share them with all of you. Let me tell you a little bit more about Sarah. Sarah Ward is a certified speech-language pathologist with over 25 years of experience in diagnostic evaluations and treatment of executive dysfunction. Ms. Ward holds a faculty appointment at the Massachusetts General Hospital Institute of Health Professions. Sarah is an internationally recognized expert on executive function and presents seminars and workshops on the programs and strategies she has developed with her co-director, Kristen Jacobsen. Their 360 Thinking Executive Function Program received the Innovative Promising Practices Award from the national organization CHAD. She has presented to and consulted with over 1,200 public and private schools in the United States, Canada, and Europe. Really impressive. So excited to have you here. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to be here today.
So I think that the things we're going to talk about are things that virtually every parent listener can relate to in terms of things that they just have challenges with or frustrations with their child on a regular basis. But before we dive into strategies, I'm always curious to know from my guests, how did you end up specializing in the work that you're doing today? Was that something you started out with right away as a speech-language pathologist? Was it something that developed over time?
Yes and no. So as a speech pathologist, my first job was at Mass General Hospital, and I worked on the inpatient and outpatient traumatic brain injury unit. So certainly individuals who have traumatic brain injury, they're always having difficulties with executive function, and I started providing outpatient treatment and rehabilitation. At the same time, I also have a daughter, and my daughter has a lot of executive function challenges. She has ADHD and dyslexia, and if you're familiar with Ross Greene's work on the explosive child,
Yep.
She was an explosive child.
Yep.
Because she had lagging development of executive skills. So I was sort of working in the field of brain injury. I knew what executive function was, but then I had this beautiful daughter who wasn't developing her executive function skills. So that sort of started me down the track of, well, then how do you develop them? And many people also know my story that my husband was riding his bicycle. He got hit by an 18-wheel Mack truck and sustained a very severe traumatic brain injury, and he lost his executive function skills. So while I was sort of familiar with it and doing it, then all of a sudden it really became such an integral part of my life, supporting both my husband and my daughter. And really that took me down the path of executive function because especially being a wife and a mother and an educator and a clinician, I always wanted to know, well, what do you do about it? You know, it would make me crazy when I'd go somewhere and they'd tell me what executive function was, but then no one really gave me strategies that I could use to really remediate it. So my real focus is all about the practical. What can we just do every day to truly support children and adults? Because oftentimes I lecture, inevitably every single time a teacher, a parent, a husband, a wife will approach me and go, oh my gosh, this is me you're talking about. And how can I help my child? Like, I'm struggling with these executive skills myself.
Absolutely. I think that's so true, what we see in our practice too. And, you know, I love what you're saying about really developing strategies for this, because you're so right that, you know, as we do evaluations on kids or adults, it's like, oh, these are the problems you're having. And it's like, well, what do I do about them? Well, here's something to read. It's like, no, really, what do I do to help my child or myself improve these? And that's what I think is so wonderful about your work, is you've really been in the trenches and you're like, here's what you do, because these skills are so vitally important, not just for getting kids through school, but for life beyond that. And you and I were talking before we started the interview about, the top 10 most important predictors of success, beyond school, and none of them are academic, right? They're all people, these abilities to manage life and manage the kinds of things we're talking about. So these are really life skills that we all need. I'd love to have you start, for people who aren't very familiar with the term executive function or executive function skills. Let's define those terms and talk about how we use them, or what kinds of struggles people have when these aren't working well for them.
Sure. So typically when I go to a school or you talk with parents, what they'll describe as being sort of the challenges of the executive function are things like organization, management of your materials in your backpack. So the kids who have sort of the exploding bedroom, or where they open up the backpack and there's crumpled papers and the sandwich that is, 3 weeks old, those kinds of things. And as they mature through the academics, you'll often hear trouble with recording homework, remembering to turn in the homework, remembering to bring home the materials that are required for a specific homework assignment, being able to manage long-term projects. It's also, in addition to an organization of materials, it's a time management skill. So it's being able to sense what time is it now? How much time do I have to be able to complete that task? Am I using my time efficiently and effectively? Am I managing to self-regulate or ignore distractions and to stay on task? And typically we'll hear parents say things such as, oh my gosh, the morning routine, like he's late getting out the door in the morning, or if I don't cue her to every single individual step, then she really can't independently get from upstairs to downstairs and be dressed and with the backpack and ready to go out the door. It's being able to manage and get everything that you need to be out the door to your soccer or your dance rehearsal or whatever it is. But then at a very even higher level, it's all around decision-making and problem solving and being able to break a task down. So it's being able to plan simple things like chores, taking out the trash, managing the laundry, and then academically, it's being able to take a complex assignment and break it down and know, how am I going to get started? What are the materials that I need? What I find fascinating, though, I guess two things. One is that from a perspective, all of those, we typically describe them as sort of being like your managerial, or people will say executive function. It's like your self-executive, in your frontal lobe that manages all that. And I guess the thing that I think is really interesting is all of those things that I mentioned: organizing, being on time, managing your backpack. Those are actually products of the executive system. It's not the process of how we do it itself. And really understanding the process of what you go through to be able to organize your backpack or to be able to be on time, I think is what is most eye-opening to parents, and it's really where our practical strategies lie. And I think that's the critical thing to share, which I'm happy to share what that is. So the thing about it is that, for example, you and I are chatting here, and any person listening, and even though you're talking to me, I guarantee you have a little movie going through your head. Now, the little movie going through your head says, okay, well, I'll finish talking with Sarah this morning. Then I've got to hop online. I absolutely have to send 3 critical emails. I've got to go into my home office. I have to gather that document because I've got to leave the house and cross town by 1 p.m. But boy, there could be traffic and I'm going to have to find parking. So I'm going to grab a protein bar on the way. I'll get gas before I go, because if I leave downtown at 5, I don't want to get stuck in traffic and have to get gas on the way home. And the list goes on. But the whole time that you're running that movie through your head, what you're doing is you're pre-imagining that future and saying, okay, what am I going to look like in that moment in time? And you're anticipating sort of the obstacles and things that go around it. Now, that ability to pre-imagine the future is a developmental skill and is at the core of what executive function is. So if you think about it as a mom, and I'll kind of give you 2 examples of this. If your child's downstairs eating breakfast, you as a mom are thinking, oh, okay, I have this meeting today. I know it's with somebody important, so I could wear the black or the blue dress, but gee, we've got to get out the door. I don't have time to iron the blue, so I think I'll wear the black dress. And you've made that decision in the kitchen, so that the minute you go upstairs and you go to your closet, you've grabbed the black dress. Children who don't do this for a variety of reasons, whether it's due to a disorder like a learning-based disability or whether it's just developmental, you're downstairs and you say, time for school, go upstairs, we need to get dressed. And this is the child who, after multiple prompts, gets upstairs and you pass their bedroom and they're playing with Legos or painting their nails. And you're like, what are you doing? Like, we've got to get out the door. And then you say, you need to get dressed. And this is the child who opens the closet and then they take one pair of pants and then they grab a different shirt and then they go in there. And before you know it, the clothes are all over the floor. And then you're racing to try to get the child out the door in the morning. And so those are the kids that we chronically describe as being what we say a beat behind. They really aren't developing that mental model and that self movie in their head of planning. And so there's this fascinating, I just think it's the coolest statement at all. It says that 90% of the time, task planning happens in a different space from where you execute the plan. I have to say that again. It's so important. So if you think about it, 90% of the time, we plan what we're going to do in one space. So you're down in the kitchen and you're planning what you're going to wear so that the minute you get in that space, you just carry out that plan. Children who don't do this, you say, go brush your teeth, go brush your teeth. We're expecting them to have this little mental movie in their head as they walk through the house and upstairs, I'm going to brush my teeth. So the minute they get in their bedroom, they grab their toothbrush. But if kids don't do that, then all of a sudden, they get in there and they're like, oh, shiny object. And off they are distracted by the thing that is there. So that processing skill of the pre-imagination of the future is actually what that true self-regulatory skill is that we have to, as parents, really foster and improve to support a student in being more independent with executive skills.
I think that's so important to understand that background, that underlying stuff that you're talking about, because so often kids with these challenges just get labeled as being a behavior problem, right? They're naughty, they don't do what they're told to do, they're resistive, they're belligerent, when really the root of so much of that is not being able to do this pre-planning, not having this mental movie, being off task or not being able to complete things, not because they're intentionally doing it, but just because they don't have the skills to do it the way that we want them to do it. And I think that's such an important distinction, but I just see that so often both in patients at the clinic and when I do work in schools. The root of so much of what gets labeled as being a behavior problem is really weak or lacking executive function skills.
Hugely so. And the part too about where I often find kids get diagnosed as having kind of behavior challenges, and I think this is really interesting, is that that distance between where you are in a moment in time and how far into the future you can see and plan is called the spatial temporal window. And so I'm going to use my video for a minute because I love my thought bubble.
Absolutely.
Right? But it's this idea that if you're downstairs, you're thinking, okay, I have to go down the hall, up the stairs and into my bedroom. That's the distance. But if you're at home and you have all of your homework on your desk, and let's say that you're in middle school, you have to think, okay, I need to put that homework into my backpack. But then you have to imagine yourself going to bed, getting up in the morning, getting to school, then going into your locker. Then you have to imagine going from the locker down the hall, up the stairs and into the science classroom, turning it in. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, even though you're at your desk at home, the distance and the space with which you're imagining turning something in is 6 miles and 12 hours from now. And the thing that's really critical about that is we have developmental norms for this. Mm-hmm. So what happens is if you think about, like, if your child is young, they're 2 or 3 years old, you get your child dressed in the morning. Really, your only goal is for that child to see themselves with their socks and their jeans and their shirt on. But around 4 or 5, you suddenly get your child dressed in their bedroom and you say, okay, go in the bathroom and brush your teeth. And you're expecting that child to be able to vision, I can go across the hall and I'm brushing my teeth. Mm-hmm. And then as they get a little older, you say, okay, I'm going to go downstairs and get breakfast. Come downstairs and meet me. You're now expecting that child to be able to go from upstairs to the bathroom and then down the stairs and into the kitchen. And again, the older, and this is one of the key things to understand, it's not that academics get harder that make the executive system more difficult. It's that the demands on how far into the future and how much planning you have to do changes. Because by the time I'm a sophomore, junior in high school, and maybe I have my driver's license. Now, not only am I just thinking, okay, get to the bathroom and get dressed, but I have to think, I need to get dressed. I need to get myself breakfast. I need to drive to school. I have to allow enough time to park the car and walk into the school. I then have to go to my first block. I have chemistry first block, and then I have English, and then I have a free block. And during my free block, I need to see myself studying for that English quiz because that's this afternoon.
Well, and I think that does really become clear when kids get to, especially at, middle school age, and certainly by high school, it's like you just see this gap widening between what the expectations are and what they're able to do. And I find that a lot of the supports that kids end up having written on their IEPs or, in their plans are really to kind of prop up and try to support these lagging executive function skills much more so than the actual academic content.
And we know that diagnostically, I think it's fascinating. There's a huge push right now to actually change the diagnostic label of ADHD to EFDD, which is executive function developmental delay, because it's absolutely been proven through the research that children with ADHD demonstrate a 30 to 35% developmental delay in this skill.
We've talked about what these skills are, how they can present problems for kids and for adults. Let's jump into some practical strategies. And I'd love to start with time management because as you've been talking about, there's so many practical areas in life where this comes up. And it's a big one that I see kids struggling with and parents getting frustrated with. So what are some of the strategies that you teach your clients and the professionals that you work with to help with the time management aspect of things?
Yeah, so actually there's a very simple one. And it relates again back to kind of this idea of having this mental thought bubble of what something will look like. And we always describe that executive function starts with that mental imagery. The problem is that when a parent or a teacher says, okay, we're going to go to science in 10 minutes, or mom says it's 3:20 and we're leaving at 3:30 for soccer practice. When you say the word 3:20 to 3:30, a lot of kids hear 3:20 or 3:30, or they see the digital 3.20, which is not actually what time looks like. So our favorite strategy is to really make time visible, but specific to the actual time that it is. So our favorite thing to do, and I'm going to use my video here, is we use really analog clocks. And it's important with an analog clock that you do use the clock itself. We'll use a dry erase marker. And we really make time truly visible so that students can see the volume of time. And remember, this is a time and space skill. So now the student can begin to visualize, well, what will I look like in a space in that given amount of time? So I'm going to keep my clock to what it is. And you can see here that it says it's like 10:40. So if I say to my child, and it's a Saturday, okay, we're going to leave for your soccer game in 20 minutes. I don't want to just say 20 minutes because the kid who's going to hear 20 minutes, they're not going to really see the planning. But if I take a marker and I draw with a dry erase marker and show, okay, we're going to leave in 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, and I really shade in that actual volume of time, this is super helpful because now the student can see the volume of time. But we actually call this a working clock, not because it has a battery, but because it helps us to do our work. And remember that time is going to pass, so that as time is passing, the student can now visually see, okay, I've got this much more time left here. But more importantly, they have the ability to also look back and do that metacognitive thinking about thinking skill to say, well, what was I doing during this time? Was I using my time effectively? And as a parent, you can really, or a teacher, you can gauge what you want that student to be doing during space and time. So if I come back to this and I say, okay, we've got to go upstairs and braid your hair for soccer. We've got to change into your outfit. You need to come downstairs and get your bag with your shin guards and your soccer ball. And then that'll give us a minute or two to grab a water bottle, maybe pee and get out the door. And that is so much more effective to saying, we have 20 minutes than to saying, we're out the door in 20 minutes. The other thing that's kind of cool about this is you also have some flexibility to really plan the time and show the time. So if you have a student, let's say, and it's, I don't know, we'll call it 3:00 and they're working on homework, you can actually write out what that's going to look like. So you can say on a clock, and I'm drawing on a clock actually with a dry erase marker. So if it's 3:00, I'm going to shade on the clock from 3 to say 3:20 to show that time for homework. So 3:05, 3:10, 3:15, 3:20. And I can shade in, okay, we've got about 5-10 minutes for spelling. And you can actually write with a dry erase marker right on the clock spelling. And then that'll give us about 5 and 10 minutes to do our math. And one thing that's kind of nice about that is the student can now see spelling and math. I'll try to get it into the screen a little bit. But the thing is that a lot of times kids too will think, oh, I've got to get ready, or, oh, I have homework. And suddenly when you show it's 20 minutes or it's 30 minutes, it makes the time see doable. And it really helps them to control for distractions, because if I see that this is the time that I've got blocked, and then I'm going to get a chance to go outside and play with my friends or ride my bike or whatever it is. I mean, even the encouragement, I think that we struggle with this idea of technology, but we want students to be able to regulate their tasks before they go to the video games or before they go to the iPad. And this is kind of a cool way for them to say, okay, well, gosh, time is passing, and now I've been distracted. If I haven't gotten my spelling done, I can really see how that's going to eat into my other time that I want. So it really makes time truly visible. But I think what's important about the fact that it's an analog clock is you're not just showing a pie of time, like 20 minutes, you're showing it actually on the clock itself. And learning that passage of time is critical because, first of all, we have more students who can't read an analog clock. I mean, I heard the most fascinating statistic that you and I as a generation, the typical clock curriculum was on average 6 months. So you've got 3 months at the end of first grade and 3 months of time curriculum at the beginning of second grade. Do you know that the average clock curriculum is 2 weeks now? And they just say, well, kids are going to go to the watch, or kids will use the cell phone, and it's digital. And that is the worst ever because, again, digital time doesn't show you volume. And the part that's about it is you really want kids to see that sweep of time. So when you're doing this as a parent, and again, I know if you're listening and you can't see it on a screen, that I'm putting my marker in the middle of the clock and I'm drawing up the minute hand and I'm counting by fives. So we're going to go to bed in 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes. And I really then go back and I shade in exactly what that volume of time is going to look like. And the counting by fives is critical because for most students who aren't efficient and aren't fluent with a clock, if it's, let's say, 3:40 and you say we're leaving in 20 minutes, most kids will picture the location of the 20 on the clock, not 20 minutes from now. So the part that's critical about it is you must draw up the minute hand and count out, we're going to work for 5, 10, 20 minutes from now, so that they're learning to predictively see that volume and sweep of time. And I think the second key kind of time management strategy is that a lot of kids, when they're in elementary school and emerging into middle and high school, we ask them to use an agenda book. And it's not that I don't think an agenda book is important. I think it's terribly important. But it's also critical to understand that an agenda book is actually a to-do list. It's listing the homework that you need to do. It's not visually showing you a schedule of the hours of what your day will look like. And what we find is a lot of students, they know, oh, okay, I've got math and reading and science tonight. But what they're not picturing is that block of time. So I leave school at 3. I should be home by 3:30. I'm home from 3:30 to 4:15. That's a time to do a little homework. From 4:15, I leave to get to soccer. I'm at soccer from 4:30 to 5:30. Maybe we'll go out for pizza afterwards. I should be home by 6. I need to shower. That gives me from 7 to 8 to wrap up a little bit of homework. We're expecting kids to figure that out and visualize that. And yet, it's not taught in school. So one of the most effective things that you can do as a parent is create a visual schedule with those 15-minute blocks of time, from, let's say, 3 to 3:15, 3:15 to 3:30, 3:30 to 4. And what I recommend, because, hey, I'm a busy mom, I don't have time to do a schedule for my child. So what I recommend is make a copy of, 7 days and fill out what is your child's usual schedule, school, after school blocks, and then maybe practices, but only put the usual things on it. Then what you can do is you can take that schedule and you can put it in a plastic sleeve protector. When you put it in a plastic sleeve protector, it becomes a write-on wipe-off surface with a dry erase marker. The coolest thing about that is then you can show your child without having to copiously rework it every morning. Hey, it's Monday. This is what our Monday looks like. You have school, you're home for an hour, then we leave for soccer practice, then you're home and you have this block of time, and then there's that nice 2-hour block of time of free time. Except if it's in a dry erase marker, you can then show them what their Tuesday looks like and say, but actually today is different. You have a dentist appointment today. So I'm going to pick you up at school at 3. You're not going to take the bus home. And there's all my alerts. Speaking of time, and you can go ahead and shade in on top of the usual schedule. I'm going to pick you up from school, we'll drive to the dentist, and then you'll be home. So today looks the same, but different. But starting as early as 5th grade, you really want students to begin to visually see blocks of daily time, because we don't teach that in school and they're not going to get it. And yet all of a sudden we expect them to go off to college and to visually see and manage a schedule. So I think that's a critical early time management tool to teach.
I find that these strategies that you're talking about right now are just such game changers, not only for me with my own child who tends to struggle with these things, but also just for so many kids we see at the clinic. That idea of taking this abstract concept of time and making it tangible and visual, so they can see that. And whether you're using, like, I love the example of the clock that you can just use a dry erase marker and write on the face, or I know that they make, visual timers and things. Now, whatever tool you're using, that just, it's a powerful strategy that I really encourage you, if you're listening and you have a child who struggles with this, because we see so many kids at our clinic who have gotten through all the higher level maths that they're required to do at the high school level for graduation. They've gotten through algebra 1 and 2, geometry, even pre-calculus, and they lack a basic awareness and sense of time and how long 20 minutes is. And if you say to them, well, it takes you 30 minutes to get to work, what time do you need to leave in order to get there on time? And they really struggle with the basics of that. That's right. So I think these are game changers in the idea of the starting to use the planner, and not just the agenda that the school gives, but actually blocking that out. And I find as kids get older and more familiar with that, they can take on more responsibility for mapping that out themselves, right?
Absolutely. And then you can eventually shift it to something like a Google Calendar. Mm-hmm. But the reason why you and I are proficient with Google Calendar is because we had the experience of writing on paper and blocking out our schedule. And two things that are sort of our favorite phrases. We love to teach our middle and high school students a phrase called the goes withs and the maybes. Mm-hmm. And what we really teach kids are, okay, so yes, you're going to soccer practice, but what goes with that is planning that block of time to get dressed and to drive to the field and to actually be dressed and prepared by the time, practice starts. Maybe there will be traffic on the way, because a lot of our kids think, oh, I just have soccer at 3 and I have my tutor appointment at 6. They're not thinking ahead of, and what goes with that is we have to drive, and maybe afterwards, yes, it ends at 7, but maybe mom will talk with the tutor for a little bit. So they don't incorporate that to really visualize their day. And I think the other thing is sort of an important strategy that parents can really be thinking about is, if you do shade on the clock when a child is doing homework, it does help them to regulate because they can be creating what we call time markers. And this idea of a time marker is, okay, if I'm reading 10 pages and I'm answering 2 comprehension questions and I've blocked a half hour, then around, let's say if I'm working from, I don't know, say 6 to 6:30, then around 6:15, I should probably be within the range of about 5 pages read and have answered about 1 question. And so when students set that little sort of midpoint goal, they suddenly have the ability to self-check in and say, well, gee, am I on track to complete this within time? And if I'm off track, then why am I off track? Do I have any what we call time robbers? What's kind of stealing my time? And again, sort of looping it back together, big picture, remember that this is a time and space skill. We're always imagining in what space, where will I be at what time, and what will I look like? So if you've shaded on a clock and I can say, oh, okay, I know that by this mark in time, I want to be dressed, or by this mark in time, I need to have this number of problems done. But there's a similar strategy that you can be using verbally with your students to help with following directions. So typically, I think we say to kids, oh, it's time for dance practice. Go upstairs, get your leotard, put on your tights and braid your hair. Go upstairs. Come on, we got to get upstairs. Let's go. Let's go. And the problem is when I'm the parent and I say, go upstairs, get dressed, I'm actually the one that's holding the visual plan and the movement through space. So our recommendation and a practical strategy is instead stop the child at the bottom of the stairs and say, okay, it's time for dance practice. When you go upstairs, use your hand and show me what's your plan when you get up there. And you want that child to say, well, I'm going to go into the bathroom and point to the bathroom, and I'm going to braid my hair. And then I'm going to go into my bedroom and I have to get my leotard and I have to get my stockings. And then I'm going to come back downstairs. Because when they're at the bottom of the stairs or they're at the end of the hallway and they're pointing out their plan, what they're really doing is seeing that spatial temporal plan of, I'm in this space, the kitchen, but what do I see myself looking like in the bathroom? So you're really fostering the development of that skill. So instead of saying, put your homework in your backpack and don't forget to turn it in tomorrow, instead say to that student, when you get to school tomorrow, tell me where you are and what time do you see handing that in, so that the student can think, okay, well, let's see, you're going to drop me off at 9. I have chemistry first. This is due in English. So I would be handing it in around 11:30, so that they're really starting to plan that future. And it's just a simple change in your language that has a huge impact to develop this sort of future planning skill.
I love that, because then they're not just continually dependent on our frontal lobe and executive function skills. They're developing them for themselves and creating that mental map, that preview that helps them with that. That's so powerful.
I had a really nice experience, an interesting experience. I gave a presentation last weekend, and it was to the Greater Phoenix Autism Society. And a woman came up to me, an adult woman, and she said, oh my goodness, she said, this is such a profound game changer. She said, let me tell you why. She said, I am late for everything and it makes my family crazy. She said, and I'm actually really good at making to-do lists and tasks. And she said, what I will do is I'll make a list and I'll have all the tasks that I need to do. It will say things like make the lunches, make sure to take out the trash, pick up the book off of my desk, and I've got to then go get gas and all these things. And she said, but all I do is see it as a list of the things. She said, I never took that task and imagined myself moving through the house and moving through the space and where I was going to complete that task. So it never existed as an amount of time. She said, I now see that I can't just look at take out the trash as a list of words, to-do list, check trash. I now have to think, I've got to pull it out of the can. I've then got to take it. I've got to wrap it up. I've got to go down the stairs, open up the garage, put it into the trash can, drag the trash can out to the end of the road. Then I've got to come back in, close the garage, come back upstairs. I've got to take a new bag and put it into the trash can. She goes, I never saw myself moving through those steps. And she said, I now see I have to envision that to be realistic about the amount of time something will take. And I thought that was really fascinating. And she just has lived a life as an adult with ADHD, really struggling. So it's a life skill that we need to teach our kids and that we have to own.
Absolutely. And I know that you have created a lot of really valuable resources. I mean, you've got a website with lots of great information, but you've got some great resources that you and your partner have created. Like I know we use your planner quite a bit here at the clinic. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you have available and also where people can find those and learn more about what you're doing?
Absolutely. So our website, pretty easy to remember. It's efpractice.com. So E like executive, F like function. And we've created a whole number of products. Some of our products are actually for classrooms and for teachers to utilize. I think the critical thing for teachers to understand is this is not a skill that's exclusive to, say, just students with ADHD or autism. All children are developmentally learning to be to utilize their executive skills. So we find that there are powerful ways just within the context of the classroom and with using your existing curriculums to foster the development of these executive skills. So we have tools for teachers. We have lots of tools that are designed specifically for teaching time management. We have an entire program called the Time Tracker Program, where we teach kids to utilize analog clocks to visualize, and we create markers on the clocks using magnets so that they can visualize where they need to be at a point in space and time. And then we have tools for teaching daily time. So we have academic planners. We have a planner for elementary students and adults because our adults liked our planner so much, we tweaked it and got rid of the homework and added it for adults. And one of the coolest things we have is something called a walk through time banner. And it is a giant, I think it's 20 feet long, and it's a giant schedule. And we roll it out on the floor, and we literally have kids walk through their day to physically feel how time is going to fill up and how time will pass. And it's powerful. When you see a student do that, we say, "Is that how you thought your day was going to feel?" They're like, "No, I had no idea." And they either realize I have way more time than I expected, or wow, I don't have a lot of time and I'm going to have to plan my time efficiently. Those are tools that I think parents can access as well as teachers. And last but not least, we have a lot of tools for just teaching students how to break down tasks. We teach that you plan backwards to execute forwards so that students really learn this idea of what will the task look like when I'm done? What do I need to do to make it look like that? And then what are the materials that I'll need so that they're planning efficiently? And I'll end with that by saying, I think one of the hardest things is if you are a parent and you get a child and they get their homework out, and then all of a sudden mid doing the homework, the child is struggling, and you enter as a parent and you say, well, did the teacher give you a study guide, or did the teacher give you a resource, or do you have anything in your notes? The problem is at that point, the child's already frustrated. At this point, the child's already melting down and I don't know, it's fine. I don't know what to do. I've got to do all these. And, there's this real angst for the child, whether they give up or whether they just feel that they have to persist. So we really talk about how important it is to start that planning before the child does the homework. So the idea of, all right, what will the homework look like when I'm done? I've completed this worksheet on my algebra. All right, what do you need to do? Well, I need to use this particular formula for the order of operations. All right, well, let's get ready. What tools and materials do you have to do that? Did your teacher give you a resource, a list of how to do it? Do you have anything in your notes? And we get the student to really lay all those materials out before they get started. And what we find is when you do that, then you really smooth the waters and you reduce that sort of mid-homework meltdown where it's hard to intervene as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a proactive approach as opposed to a reactive approach, and it makes all the difference for their emotional and behavioral regulation too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so many great resources that you have. I really encourage people to check those out. And I think what's really powerful about this is for those of us who just get this stuff, inherently and didn't grow up with these challenges, it's hard to imagine that a person isn't able to think through things in this way. And yet what you're doing is really helping us to understand more how we do this and how we naturally break it down, so that we can understand where those challenges are happening for our kids to be able to guide them through it. Such powerful information. Sarah, I really can't thank you enough for being here today. This was wonderful.
Thanks for the invite. I had a lot of fun. Happy to connect.
All right, everybody. Thanks for being here with us on this episode. We'll see you next time on The Better Behavior Show.
Thank you for listening to The Better Behavior Show with Dr. Nicole Beurkens. Leave a review on iTunes and share this episode with your friends. Visit drbeurkens.com to ask any questions for an upcoming episode, post comments for today's show, and sign up to receive weekly updates. That's drbeurkens.com.